we'll interview three of our college's most promising graduates about their experiences applying to and preparing for university and work abroad. Our guest for the first session is Natasha Desai, a recent graduate of our college. I'm very happy to say that she was my direct superior at the RUIAC Monthly for the past 2 years. And moreover, she has been accepted to Wageningen University in the Netherlands, which is ranked number one in the fields of plant and animal science in the world by US News and World Report. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Natasha. It's a great pleasure to have you.
It's great to be back here working with the Rohit Aditya. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to hear that. So, without further ado, I'll plunge into the interviews. So, the first thing I would like to ask you is when exactly did you first decide to pursue your postgraduate degree abroad? Was it something which you were sure about before you joined RUIA College, or did it come by degrees while you were working and studying at RUIA?
So the decision to do my postgraduate studies abroad, I pretty much took just as I was taking admission into RUIA College. I pretty much cemented at the fact in fairness, I knew that I wanted to do my studies in wildlife, in birds specifically, or at least in wildlife conservation, probably since I was a little kid. So even when I applied to RUIA for a BSc in zoology, I knew I'd be doing a master's in wildlife conservation somewhere. And at that point in time, just entering my first year, I didn't really know how much scope there was for that field in terms of education in India. So the first thing that popped in my head was, well, it looks like I'll have to pursue my master's abroad. And then I just went ahead from there.
All right. That makes perfect sense. So, I think one of the first things that in the admission process, one of the first things that comes to mind is getting some kind of like guidance, because it's a big jungle of out there, and it's pretty hard for prospective students to like figure out what to do. So, what kind of guidance or what kind of help did you have, or who advised you during the different stages, like from start to finish?
So I specifically was in a particular group of classes called IMS, and they helped with both my preparation for the entrance exams and as well as the preparation later, which was in the terms of preparing a resume, an SOP, the stuff that I would need to have ready when I apply in terms of that. So you can always apply for the classes. There's different. It's not just IMS. I know for a fact there's like multiple classes across Mumbai. So you can choose after looking at the syllabus whether you want to be in a class, you want to learn from someone else when you give these exams, or if you think you'll be able to keep up with the studies yourself, I say go for it.
All right. You said entrance exams, and I take it that what you mean by that is like the GRE, the TOEFL, the IELTS.
The entrance exam was a bit rough. What I mean is the English tests. Yep.
Okay. So that's actually a pretty big subject of anxiety amongst a lot of students. One of the top questions that we have is that about the IELTS and TOEFL, like which one to take and how hard they are, what preparation you need. So could you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So first things first, there's 3 tests, the major ones that you need to know. The SAT obviously doesn't apply anymore because I'm talking about postgraduate degrees here. The SAT would come into place if you are going for an undergraduate degree. So you can ignore that one. So the major exams in place are the GRE, the TOEFL, and the IELTS. In these 3, the TOEFL and the IELTS are very similar in structure. With the IELTS, the major difference just really being that the IELTS has a bit of a higher standard for their vocabulary, and it seems to be more internationally recognized. For example, I remember reading that some places in the UK and in Australia will specifically take the IELTS but not the TOEFL.
The TOEFL.
So I think that's the only major difference. And the major difference between the GRE, the IELTS, and TOEFL is the GRE is needed for the United States most prominently, whereas Europe, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia will look at the IELTS and TOEFL.
Okay. And like as for the difficulty and what preparation you did for these exams, could you go into that a little bit?
So very different preparation. The TOEFL and IELTS are mainly just testing your fluency as of such in the English language. There's no other subject being tested. It's just English for one thing.
Right.
And they're really just, I gave the IELTS, not the TOEFL, but from what I know, they're relatively similar in structure. So they test your reading skills, your listening skills, your writing skills, and your speaking skills. Essentially, it's just a very basic test to make sure that when you do travel, you won't have any issues in communicating in English, is what they're trying to test you for. So that exam will be scored on a 9 band, and the higher your average score, the better your fluency. The GRE is a lot tougher. So I'd say the IELTS is pretty much your average English. I'd say 12th or even 10th grade English is fine. You brush up on basic English vocabulary and sentence structuring and grammar, and you obey those rules when you give this paper, and you'll be perfectly fine. The GRE is different. First of all, they're not just testing your English, they're testing your maths. There's two major subjects on that paper. And the English is a lot tougher. The maths is quite okay. I'd say if 10th standard maths, honestly speaking, it's quite easy. You don't really need to worry about it. Nothing different from what we've learned. There's not even any calculus or any difficult statistics that you have to worry about. So trust, the math is quite all right. The English, however, is at a much higher standard and is quite difficult because it'll be split into different sections like vocabulary, reading comprehension, the essays, etc. There's different kinds of questions, and it's a much higher standard than what most people here in India are used to.
Right. So I'd actually like to go a little bit into that element of choice between the American universities, which have seem to have a completely different set of exams, and universities elsewhere like the UK and the EU. So would you go into the differences in applying to the US and the EU and other parts of the country world?
Yeah. So this is something that I ran into specifically, something that I figured out while I was applying, because I was originally targeting the United States because I wanted to see if I could get into Cornell for ornithology. And it became very clear very quickly that the procedure for the United States, I'm talking about research degrees here, MS, is very different from the European Union. For one thing, the European Union generally has a procedure, also Australia, where it's kind of like the procedure here, where you see the program, you look at the deadlines, you'll see the requirements. There will be an application portal open. You go there, you create an account, you upload all the required documents, get them verified. Then your application goes to an admission committee, and they'll get back to you with an acceptance or rejection letter. The US, however, tends to take it less on the taught course perspective and more on a research perspective, is what I've seen. And because of that research perspective, what they ask you to do is, instead of directly applying to the course, they ask you to look at the faculty list first, because obviously all the faculty there is either masters or PhD professors themselves, and they all are heading labs of their own in which different studies are being conducted. So they ask you to go through all of that faculty, select a few faculty members whose your interests align with, and you email them with a bit of a short bio saying, this is who I am, this is what I'm interested in, these research papers and studies from your lab seem really interested, and I'd love to do my master's while working under you. So can you let me know if there is an opening in your lab? And then the professor needs to get back to you with a yes or a no. And if it's a yes and they want to learn more, you'll have to talk with them. Essentially, you need an endorsement from one of the professors in that university before you can apply for a master's degree. From what I could tell, if you apply without any professor endorsing you, they're not even going to bother looking at your application, because they're like, no one said there's space for you, essentially.
Ouch. So there's basically two layers to the process of application in
the
US
American system.
Right. And that's because because of they are very different. The American system and elsewhere, they're very different in terms of focus, like a research focus as opposed to a more standard taught kind of focus.
I won't be able to go into much detail because once I started realizing I wasn't really getting into the United States, so I should be shifting my focus, I didn't really bother looking into the United States courses more.
Right.
But what I learned was, essentially their courses will focus more on the research and practical aspects of it, and there might not necessarily be that many taught aspects. It'll be more focusing on independent research or group research, etc. Whereas in the EU, there will be more of a taught aspect, the kind of way, in fact, that people are used to here, where there are courses and subjects that you'll be giving exams for, assignments for. And then the second year of your master's, you will have your internship and your thesis as expected. So the second year will be more research based. The first year will be more concept based.
Standard.
Yeah.
Okay. Understood. So, could you also go about like the differences within the EU? Like you applied, I understand, to different countries in the European Union and as
Yeah.
well. So, like, could you just go into more of like the fine-grained differences within one country in the EU and to another?
So with the EU, the major differences seem to come really between the United Kingdom and, well, I can actually say the United Kingdom and the EU now. Technically, they're not there anymore. But yeah, so the United Kingdom and the EU is where the differences really actually come to light. The majority of master's courses in the UK, especially in Britain, happen to be 1 year courses, not two. So
Okay.
it's a 1 year
Okay.
master's. So you straight away jump into an internship and a thesis pretty much. Whereas the
Mm-hmm.
rest of the countries, Germany, France, the Netherlands, happen to be
Mm-hmm.
2 year master's courses.
Okay.
And this is a general rule of thumb. I wouldn't say that you should follow this absolutely. But the advice that I got in general was that if you're applying to universities with 1 year masters, really only accept if the university is like an
Excellent.
extremely high grade university or was absolutely your first choice, because a lot of the time people from here already run into the fact that the years of education are low, like the 12 plus 3 12 plus 4 issue I'm talking about over here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
On top of that, if you end up doing a 1 year masters only, you might find
Right.
sometimes that there are certain job opportunities that will elude you because people will simply say that you don't have enough years in your education.
I see. I see. Actually, before we go on any further, I think that now that you approach the topic, it might be worth discussing it. Like, what is this distinction between 12 plus 3 and 12 plus 4? Could you like just go into it for our viewers?
So it's essentially all they're doing is counting your years of education. So 12, I'm talking about obviously for Indians, it's the 12th standard, your 12th standard boards. So that's
Right.
12 for everyone. And then after that, it's the number of years you spent on your undergraduate degree. So for anyone doing a bachelor's in science, for example, it's going to be 3.
Mm-hmm.
Is a, I'm not sure, is a BTech 4? I think so. I'm not, I don't
I think
remember.
so. I
Maybe
think so too.
I think so. But you get my point. So basically, if your
Right.
bachelor's was a 4 year degree, it would be 12 plus 4. If it was 3, like mine and a lot of us, it's 12 plus 3. So the rule is generally the
Mm-hmm.
United States in particular and certain
Right.
universities in the EU only take students with a 12 plus 4 education thing. If you
I
have
see.
12 plus 3, they'll either ask you to do like a pre-master's course, or they'll ask you to do one more year of education, like a 1 year of your master's here or anywhere you want, and then reapply.
Mm-hmm.
Some
Mm-hmm.
universities, however, do take 12 plus 3, like mine and several others in the EU. But generally, the US will not really acknowledge a 12 plus 3. A lot of
Okay.
people are saying that this has started to change lately,
Okay.
but I personally did not find any people really open to it. So I would say
Mm-hmm.
in that case, you would really have to have some amazing research and internship experience on your resume for them to take notice of a 12 plus 3 student. Otherwise, then you would be
Okay.
better off just straight off applying to a university that has said that they're fine with 12 plus 3.
Understood. Understood. So, like, is there some room for leeway in all of this? Like, a university
Okay,
going,
so
oh,
speaking from personal experience, I had
right,
also applied to the Swedish University of Life Sciences and Agriculture over in Umeå,
right.
another massive university for environmental sciences. I usually recommend anybody who's looking for courses in the environmental or ecological sector, check that one out for sure. But heads up in advance for you guys, they have specific requirements for students coming from specific countries, and for India, it happens to be 12 plus 4. I had happened to have a nice and lengthy discussion with the program advisor for wildlife conservation. He'd really liked my resume and SOP, and he said that I actually had the bio of a really good prospective student, and he would endorse me if it came to it. But the thing is, admissions is handled by a separate admission committee, admission department. The faculty of your program is not necessarily going to be involved in any way in your admission. I'm talking about the EU here. Obviously, the US is different because like I said, you need the professor's endorsement.
Right.
But so what happened in my case was SLU, I applied either way, and I even included the fact that the program director has endorsed it. But they
Mm-hmm.
came back very clearly saying it's 12 plus 3, so we can't take you, it's the policy.
Right.
This is
Right.
fine, I get it. But yeah, so I personally couldn't find any leeway. But
Okay.
like I will say this in terms of the 12 plus 3, 12 plus 4, and in terms of literally everything else. Ask
Mm-hmm.
the faculty advisors, the professors of the program that you are applying to, anything and everything you can. A, because they are the best people equipped to handle your questions about the individual programs at individual universities.
Mm-hmm.
And B, because the more interest you show in a program, the more those professors will actually be inclined to accept and endorse you as a student. They are
I see.
genuinely looking for passionate individuals and not just people with the best grades. So
I
honestly,
see.
your best advice is always like talk to them as much as you can. Don't worry about like, oh my god, am I being annoying? Is this too many emails? They want to talk to prospective students. So don't worry about it.
Right, right. So it does sound like that's just something very important to keep in mind as far as education abroad goes. Just pester the faculty as much as possible. They won't mind. So moving on, this actually you briefly mentioned like SOPs and all of that in just a little while ago, and I think that is probably the number one worry which students have. So
Yeah.
could you like just explain, walk us through the process of what that SOP process was like for you?
So an SOP, a statement of purpose, and a resume. These will be your two basic documents when applying, not counting your mark
Mm-hmm.
sheets, of course. So they're two wholly different documents, which is something I learned. I'm telling you, I walked into this blind as well. So a resume is essentially just a giant catalog or index, if you will, of everything you've done in terms of research experience, in terms of internships, in terms of intracurricular and extracurricular activities, what everything you've learned, etc., etc., etc. And your statement of purpose or SOP is essentially going to be a very long, almost autobiographical essay, I've got to say.
Okay.
Because what they want in that statement of purpose is you talking about yourself, a little bit of yourself, just give a little bit of basic background, then how you came about to like the field that you are applying for. In my case, it was wildlife conservation. So how I would came about to like wildlife conservation, what were the circumstances
Mm-hmm.
when I decided I wanted to do this, what I want to do in this field after my education is
Mm-hmm.
done, where do I want to work, is it, stuff like that, past and future plans. And at the end, a small paragraph or so about, therefore, why you pick this particular university and this particular program that you are applying to.
Right.
So that essentially becomes your statement of purpose. A decent sized essay about yourself, your inspirations, your ambitions, why you chose this field and why you chose that university.
Okay, so like narrowing down a little more precisely, when you say decent sized, that's somewhere in the ballpark of what, 2,000, 3,000
Yeah, a 2000,
words?
3000 SOP, I'd say is fine. I'd say if you really need a benchmark of sorts, I remember my consultant telling me just don't cross 5,000. Don't do it.
Okay,
It's like at that
okay,
point, you're really stretching it. Like, here's the
okay,
thing, like,
okay.
it's like I said, the teachers and professors really appreciate details. The more they learn about you, the more inclined they are to accept you as a student. But you don't need to
Mm-hmm.
go overboard, is what I'm saying. If you really
Right.
do need a benchmark, I'd say 5,000 is fine. But I will also say don't make it like just a page long. That's not what they're looking
Okay.
for. There needs to be a decent amount of content in that SOP.
Okay. You actually mentioned a consultant right about now. Could you like tell us what help you had while writing the SOP? Like, how
So
were you helped in the process?
I mentioned earlier I was at IMS for classes, right? For the GRE.
Mm-hmm.
I needed
Exactly.
help for the GRE a lot. And after that, they said that we are also willing to help you with the application process. Once you get your marks in, the application process starts. And
Mm-hmm.
trust me, it's a lot lengthier than it looks, because the thing is, I think we ended up going through, like, Aditya, you and I have spoken. I'm
Yep.
actually decent at writing, at least. I know that.
Of course.
And even then, I think I went through about 10 drafts of that SOP. 10 minimum,
I see.
because they said that it's better if you send as polished a document as possible. So the consultant
Mm-hmm.
was essentially giving me guidelines as to, okay, so this is the stuff that you need to start with. A, selection of universities. B, as you're selecting universities, we need you to start working on your resume, your SOP, make sure that your grades are going well at the same time, of course, extracurricular work, etc., etc. So the consultant was essentially just a guiding factor through the whole thing. And also she was helping me place deadlines as well, so I wouldn't procrastinate too much as such. So she was like, so by this point in time you need to have all of this done, so we are ready to go when the application deadlines come in. Because the last thing you want is to leave everything to the deadline and then submit a rushed application, because sometimes that a rushed SOP can really be just the dividing line between your application getting accepted or rejected.
Right. Okay. So this you mentioned grades just now, and I think this is something that probably has to be discussed. So what kind of grades are they like? Are these different universities looking at? Like, do you think there's some kind of lower limit which should not be breached at any cost by students, or?
Generally, universities will say it on their site. From what I saw from the universities that outright stated that this was the limit, a 7 to 7.5 CGPA is the minimum you need to apply overall.
Okay.
Like you can't really be going below that.
Okay.
Also,
Understood.
you have to remember, like, course credits, the system isn't really implemented in India, but it matters heavily over there. The credits that you see every time next to everyone's mark sheets, 20 credits you got for your paper 1 in zoology, etc., etc. Those credits are actually important in determining whether you're eligible for the program or not. For instance, my brother, he did a biotech BSc over in Pune, and he applied for a master's in biotech at a Swedish university. But they said that since the course was more leaning towards zoology, he was actually lacking a certain amount of course credits required. So even though he has a complete degree with fantastic grades, he was lacking credits in that particular sector of biology. So he had to do a pre-master's program and then a master's to be eligible for the master's. I didn't run into any such problems, mainly because my major was zoology. So I had all the required credits in the necessary subject.
Right. Another thing, extracurriculars. Like on your SOP, you mentioned that that's another important column to pretty much fill up well. So could you talk about what extracurriculars you had and what you would recommend a prospective viewers who to have like on their SOP?
So that's actually the fun thing about extracurriculars in this case. It really doesn't matter. The good news is a lot of people are like, do the extracurriculars have to necessarily be relevant to my field? And it's really not the case. Your extracurriculars could be anything that you've been doing since you were kids: singing, dancing, painting, whatever you want, writing even. For example, my extracurriculars were in fact the major chunk of it was the Ruyat Monthly, since I was with the magazine for 3 years. Another major chunk of it was my volunteer work with a rescue and welfare organization here in Mumbai. I was with them pretty much since halfway through my first year, I think. So 2.5 years practically of experience with them. So that was the other major chunk in my extracurriculars. And I will say a lot of people tend to underestimate the value that volunteer work has on that resume. Don't do it. Trust me. Even if you are lacking in the internship or research sector, a good extracurricular section, especially with volunteer work, etc., can go a long way to boosting that resume.
Okay, I see. So is there like a very particular value placed on that kind of volunteer work abroad? Is it like
They really do. Honestly speaking, my consultant hammered this in for me because I literally signed up for an NGO. I'd been working for another one previously, but I'd stopped when I joined Ruya. And then when she told me, no, you don't understand. It's better if you are in an NGO because they put a massive amount of value on it, like on volunteer work, etc. So then I rejoined another NGO actually. So it's actually, I'd say it's honestly pretty imperative that you have volunteer experience on your resume. Again, I'm repeating myself, but the type of volunteer experience does not necessarily matter. Like, for example, just because I was in wildlife, I wanted a wildlife career doesn't mean I had to have volunteer experience in wildlife. Even if it had been other kinds of volunteer experience, like say in education or somewhere else, awareness maybe, it still counts.
I see. So that's kind of the impression I'm getting about extracurriculars. It's something which you should have, but what kind is not necessarily that important. Understood.
They like to see, essentially, they like to know, and they actually will appreciate the fact that you're a well-rounded student and not necessarily, just someone with the best grades.
Focused.
They're not looking for the valedictorian. They're looking for the kids who have the most potential in several fields, not just the field that they're applying for. So your extracurriculars actually reflect well on your personality as well, and they will also place a lot of emphasis on your compatibility with the program. If they sense that you're an approachable, friendly person, or someone who's done a lot of extracurriculars, they'll sense that you'll be a good addition to the program, even as a person, as a human being.
I
That's what I
see.
mean.
It's like it's a pretty holistic thing. Like it's not just
Yeah,
grade; it's
it's
also the
very
person.
holistic. Yep.
Okay, so moving on from that to something else you mentioned very briefly right now, work experience and internships. This is a major subject of anxiety because, especially given this pandemic, most of the people, most of our viewers are very afraid that, we don't have any work experience because of the pandemic, we couldn't get internships and so on and so forth. So, could we know your experience with regards to the work experience situation? Is it like, how did it help or hinder? What happened there?
So, fun fact, when my consultant gave me a skeleton for the resume, right? Obviously, I didn't have anything prepared beforehand. So she gave me a skeleton of sorts and said, you can use this and build up on it, fill in the categories. And the categories were stuff like, your bio, your personal information, your previous education, extracurriculars, major achievements in academics, etc., or even sports, if you have any. And of course, there was a section for internships and there was a section for research.
Right.
Even by the time I submitted my applications 2 years later, both of my sections were blank because I got none. So it's difficult. Okay, I'm talking about now specifically wildlife in my case because that's the field I was going for. But quite frankly speaking, as a bachelor student in India, it is near impossible to score an internship or a research assignment. It doesn't happen. Like every
Okay.
time I tried, especially in terms of wildlife at BNHS, say, or where was I tried at NCBS, but they kept saying that they needed at least, or that the person applying needed to at least have a master's degree, which obviously I did not
Okay.
have. And in the end, I ended up telling my consultant that I haven't been able to score a single internship. I haven't been able to score a single research assignment. And
Okay.
she's like, okay, that's a bit worrying, but like my grades have always been good. I had extracurriculars, like I said. And she said the rest of your stuff is fine. And your my SOP is something that I was personally very proud of because it's a very personal essay. And like I said, I've been wanting to do this since I was a kid. So all of that personal history is in there. So she said the other points of your application are strong, so don't worry about it. Just apply. If they do happen to ask for some reason, if they do happen to do a follow up and say, why you don't have any, you can always explain to them later. And
Right.
as it turns out, it didn't really have that much of an effect because I think I applied to 13 or 14 universities and I only got one rejection letter. Every
Okay.
other university I got accepted into. Like they didn't even question the
That.
lack of no wait, I had two technically rejections, but you get my point. They didn't really care about the fact that there was no research or internship experience on my resume.
Understood. Understood. So that's actually some a point which I think I forgot to touch upon, and that would be, do the SOPs have to be like tailored to each university and each program you're applying to, or do they have to be like they can be mass produced in a sense, like you
No,
can
no,
just
no,
copy
no.
paste?
So it's a bit of a fine line.
Okay.
Since I was fixated on first ornithology, it became very clear that ornithology masters was a very niche field, and I wasn't really going to find
Okay.
that many universities. So I widened it to wildlife conservation. And in wildlife conservation, then I found plenty of universities across the globe.
Okay.
So what I ended up doing, since I was essentially applying for the same program, the majority of
Right.
my SOP remained the same, apart from the last paragraph where I was talking about why I was applying to this university. So
Okay.
obviously the name of the university, the details of the program, the name of the program, because it's not necessarily called wildlife conservation everywhere. For example, where I've applied, Wageningen, it's called forest and nature conservation. Whereas
Okay.
I say in Oxford, it was called wildlife conservation right off the bat. So,
Right.
that last paragraph you can edit, the way. But again, this depends. Like I said, I was applying for one particular program. So there are some people who prefer to keep their avenues open. Like my brother, who was applying for both molecular biology, biotech. I think he also applied for a genetic engineering program. So the
Okay.
masters. So the point is, when the programs are different in like scope and entirety, you cannot be submitting the same SOP, especially if you're applying to the two different programs at the same university. Like maybe
Okay.
if it's like molecular biology at university A and genetic engineering at B, university
Mm-hmm.
B, it'll be fine
Right.
if you have pretty much the same SOP, as long as you know the content is relevant to both cases. But if you're
Right.
applying for both molecular biology and genetic engineering at university A and you use the same SOP, not gonna cut it. The departments are going to
Right.
realize that you pretty much mass produced, like you said, and that's going to shoot your chances.
Right. Right. That does produce a pretty bad impression, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, so there's just another thing which I'd like to ask. It's like it's all very fine to like discuss, how the theory of the process and how it should be. Could you just talk about how it actually felt like, to be in the thick of all that? When did you start, and how long, and how much? Basically, what are your feelings throughout the entire process from start to finish?
I started off as being very stressed because I suddenly realized right at the beginning that okay, I've underestimated the process. For one thing, there's a lot more that needs to be done than you think. But if you pace yourself well enough, the way I did, there was no stress because I by the
Mm-hmm.
time the application deadlines did come around, I had everything ready to go. Everything was ready to go, from the letters of recommendation to an SOP, a resume, uh, yeah, all of my certificates, etc. Everything was ready to go. So as
Okay.
long as you pace yourself and you give it a good amount of time, you're not going to have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I'll say in terms of the entrance exams now, English happens to be one of my favorite subjects, so I may be biased here, but I had fun with both the exams. I legitimately
Okay.
like exams like these, exams that test my cognitive skills, or rather puzzle solving skills in terms of vocabulary. So I had fun with
Right.
both exams. Some people might not, I get it. But honestly, I feel like the exam might go a lot easier if you look at it as a fun paper and not necessarily, something you have to get through.
Right. 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 That does make a total amount of sense. So there's moving on from that to the process itself to more of like the post admission letters phase. So like how did you narrow down your choice of universities from the 12 you said to the one which you decided to attend? Like what are the
So
factors behind that?
essentially, pretty much when you narrow down the universities that you'll be applying to, is when you pretty
Mm-hmm.
much end up making a tier list in your head as well of what your first choice is, what your second choice is. So by the time the
Right.
letters come in, you would already have done your research on each university and decided which, okay, I prefer this one over the others. If I don't get into this one, maybe this one, etc., etc. So by the time the admission
Mm-hmm.
letters rolled around, all I had to do was look at where I'd been accepted, where I hadn't been accepted, and pick the one that was
Mm-hmm.
highest on my list, which happened to be Wageningen.
Okay. Okay. So, in terms of the visa and the technical formalities of moving abroad, could you please tell me what exactly it all of that involved, especially in the COVID age and with the lockdown and all? Could you just tell us what exactly it entailed?
So I'm not gonna like lie to you. Currently, in terms of COVID times, it's a pain. It's an absolute
Okay,
pain to be applying for travel
right,
visas and everything, because
right.
they are doing as much as they can to restrict travel, and it's fair in their sense. So the only people they're really allowing to travel into the EU right now, because if you look at the news, the European Union is in a massive lockdown right now,
Right.
and they're only really allowing people with residence permits, long stay visas like mine, etc., to travel.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually need to go to Delhi for my visa on the 19th.
Okay,
It's all my visa's
okay,
already been approved by the Dutch government, but the biometric verification part. So
right,
it turns out
right.
they've shut all the consulates and VFS centers in Mumbai.
Oh no,
So
that's
you have to go all the way to Delhi.
amazing.
So, like I said, in COVID times, obviously, it's a lot tougher than it would have been in normal times. In normal times, you're not really going to run into issues.
Okay.
Policies for visas will differ from country to country, from university to university. My university was actually really nice, and they applied for my
Mm-hmm.
visa, not me. My
Okay.
brother, yeah, my brother applied to a Swedish university, like I said, and he had to do the entire visa procedure by himself from scratch over here. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
I was told, no, 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 you don't worry about it. We'll apply from here, and then you'll get an approval
Okay.
letter from the Dutch immigration center here, and you need to just take that to the embassy and pretty much just get your fingerprints verified, and come back. That's it.
Right. Right. I see.
So it depends on your university.
I see. So like again, it seems like the thumb rule is to like be pretty communicative with the university, because it does
Yep.
seem like they can do a lot for you.
Yes. They are honestly, they're very helpful. Don't underestimate how helpful they're willing to be in terms of prospective students. They are legitimately willing to extend a lot of help.
I see. I see. That's actually really good to hear, because it can feel like, we are friendless and stuck on a sea, but this is actually trying to pull us on land in a sense. So there's obviously the other thing to ask, like the kind of like the corollary to that. What exactly does what preparations have you made in prospect of moving to a foreign country, the Netherlands?
So first, I'm going to talk about just moving in general, and then I'll zero down on the EU. So moving in general, I've
Right.
had friends who went abroad for their undergrad degrees, so I pretty much just pestered them a lot. The key things that they
Okay.
told me is don't pack as much stuff as you think you're going to need. 90% of the times, first year students end up over carrying. Just take
Mm-hmm.
your necessities.
Right.
Number two, if the place you're going has drastically different weather from where you are,
Okay.
which it will be
Okay.
for me, they said
Mm-hmm.
that don't go, oh my god, I need a lot of winter stuff and carry from here, because A, that's going to increase the weight in your bag and maybe even
Right.
leave out some stuff. B, you'll find more suitable stuff over there. So carry a few pairs of winter clothing if you're going to need it, and buy the rest of it
Mm-hmm.
over there. In fact, the buy the rest of it over there rule is just a general thing. Things that you don't necessarily need to carry immediately, you just buy over there, because it reduces the amount of weight that you need to carry, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously then it opens up space in your bag for other stuff that you will need to carry from here.
Right.
The other important thing in general for the EU, because not in the United States but the EU, is the language.
Right.
Depending on the country in the EU which you're traveling to, it the necessity for you to know their language goes from either not necessary at all to, yeah, please learn the language. It's literally a scale depending on which country you're in. For example, France and Germany, Italy also to an extent, have a bit of a cultural issue where they would really rather prefer, they don't expect you to be fluent straight away, but they would
Mm-hmm.
like it if you could at least do basic communication in their language.
Right.
They look at it, it's not them trying to be snobbish or anything of the sort. It's just them expecting you to offer basic courtesy to their language, because in their heads what they're saying is, we are doing you a courtesy by speaking English, so you can
Right.
return the courtesy by speaking a bit of our language. It's that way.
Right.
You'll
Exactly.
find you get
Exactly.
along a lot better in those countries if you can speak their language. The more
Mm-hmm.
fluent you are, the better. The
I
Netherlands
see.
specifically, I was told, I did do my A1 level in Dutch in the quarantine,
Mm-hmm.
but I
Yeah.
was very, very quickly told that I would not have to worry about Dutch really over there. It's a good thing to do, like I said, just because you'll have an easier time of it with the locals. But in the
Right.
Netherlands specifically, they're very friendly people and they're quite willing to speak English. So
I see.
if you can't speak Dutch, not a problem, they'll instantly switch to English.
Okay. And this is another aspect I want to touch on. What kind of do you think students living here can expect like a big cultural shock when they move to? I don't know. The EU is shock enough, but even the UK or the US or somewhere else like that. Like, what
You
can we
really do need
expect?
to be prepared. Yeah, like I said, the language barrier is a one thing for
Right.
sure. Number two is you really do need to be prepared to the fact that these guys are a lot more open and a lot more social structured than we are. Social structured is
Mm-hmm.
actually the wrong word to use. The Indians are very social in their own right. What I mean
Right.
is these guys are a lot more free. Like you'll notice, obviously, certain laws are very different. The way they interact with each other is very different, and you need to be able to travel with an open mind. I will say definitely, like you are perfectly welcome to live how you are as a person, and the way you want to think and believe is your individual right. No one can take that away
Right.
from you. But one
Mm-hmm.
thing that you definitely cannot afford to be when you're traveling there is judgmental of other people's lifestyles.
Right.
It's perfectly valid if you don't accept a certain lifestyle or choice. Say maybe some people might be uncomfortable with drinking, etc. But if you're going to start being picky about the people you hang out with over there because of this, you might find that it's very, very difficult for you to make friends over there.
Right.
Also, being judgmental of food choices. Like, again, it's
Right.
perfectly okay for you to eat whatever you want. No one is going to
Mhm.
ever force you to eat something that you don't want to eat. But at the same time, you cannot be judging people for what they're eating over there.
Right.
In case there's a lot of vegetarians tend to run into this issue where they
Mhm.
can't really tolerate the smell also of meat. And I'd say
Right.
that's something that's one of your biggest hurdles, because they're very big on meat eating. So it's not something that
Mhm.
you're going to be able to avoid.
Okay, understood. So I think there's one thing I've missed in all of this. It's regarding the financial situation. Like when you'll be going there, do you have any kind of like scholarship or anything like that on handle, or how did you handle like the financial side? Because there's a lot of worry about uh, like in the US and the UK at least, costs are pretty prohibitive. And I know the situation is a little different in EU, but it's probably still there. So, what kind of financial aid is available for the prospective student, the prospective nervous student?
There's scholarships available in every single university. Again, a lot of this will also depend on your individual research. Like I said, it's very important that you read up into everything that your university has to offer, including the deadlines for scholarships. Certain
Mm-hmm.
scholarships you may not even have to apply to, they'll automatically consider you when you apply for the program. Certain scholarships you might have to submit a separate application for. Sometimes they'll even ask for an extra essay. It depends on the country, on the university. But there are so many scholarships available for students. I will say, though, the
Mm-hmm.
scholarships a lot of the time tend to focus on your academic excellence. There are
Mm-hmm.
also scholarships for extracurricular and all round students, but I will say the
Mm-hmm.
scholarships do tend to focus on your academic excellence. So if you are genuinely dependent on a scholarship to get to your
Right.
foreign university, you need to focus on making your grades exemplary. That
Mm-hmm.
is your highest chance of getting a good scholarship.
Right. Right. So there's another question which probably concerns a lot of students, and that is going to be what exactly what are the job prospects once you graduate abroad, like the possibilities of getting a job in that foreign country once you've graduated. So what do you have in mind in particular? Like, could you just talk a little bit about your ideas of what you're going to do?
So with wildlife conservation, the forest and nature conservation, in fact, the aspects are endless. You could either be in the awareness sector, working as an activist, say a journalist, even. Basically, working
Mm-hmm.
on the awareness sector would involve you taking the research data that's being produced and spreading it to the world, and talking about how best to utilize this data to protect the planet. If you look on the
Mm-hmm.
policy side, you could even go into the political sector or the government sector, be responsible for making the policies involved in protecting the planet. And if you choose
Right.
to stay with the research in the ecology sector, you would be supplying the data to these two people. You would be on field, you would be working in forests, etc., collecting the data, raw data, analyzing it, and sending it to these people, the policymakers and the activists. So there's so much scope. So
Mm-hmm.
you could work as a research intern or do your own research project at so many institutes across the world. You could go into activism, you could start your own NGO or join an NGO as a worker, not
Mm-hmm.
as a volunteer anymore, as a proper, a person who works at the
Right.
NGO.
Right. Right.
You could go into if you so chose, you could go into policy making. You could see if you could join a government or the UN representatives even for environmental
Right.
change.
Right. So, like, how do the prospects differ abroad and over here once you've like done the degree, like in terms of like
So
qualifications and all?
So you will find it a bit easier to get jobs with a master's degree outside than in India. From what I've seen in
Mm-hmm.
India, a foreigner, I will say, though, a master's degree from a foreign university might help you score a few jobs in India. But as a
Mm-hmm.
general rule of thumb, from what I've seen, they'll give more weightage to PhD degrees.
Okay.
And whereas abroad, you will pretty much see the universities say it themselves. They'll offer you ways to contact their alumni, the students, who've
Okay.
gone on to do jobs. So you can talk to them as well. Again, like I said, the
Mm-hmm.
communication, their database is endless. You can talk to current students, you can talk to alumni, who are currently working in different fields. You can ask them how their experience was. You can ask them if you think that if your career plan is different and you're wondering, is this course the right path for me? You could ask the faculty advisor or even some alumni, do you think this would be the right course for me? This
Right.
your application and getting into the right university for you is entirely dependent on how well you communicate with everyone. Communication is
Right.
really the key factor.
Understood. Understood. So I'd like to just wind up here, and just as a kind of a quick recap, could you just go over like one more time, one last time, over like the timeline of the entire process from start to finish, just for our viewers here.
All right. So if you look at from the start of it, when I got into first year, I started
Mm-hmm.
studying for the GRE pretty much. By the time we
Right.
hit the start of second year, I gave the GRE. At this point,
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking I was going to apply to the US. Like I said, you don't have to give the GRE if you're sure that you're not going to the United States. Just don't give it. Same goes for
Right.
Ulta. The inverse is if you know you're not going to be applying to the EU and Australia, don't give the IELTS and TOEFL.
Right.
So I gave the GRE in my second year, the start of my second year. The After you study for the GRE, the IELTS is even easier because the English is nowhere near that level. So you didn't
Right.
really have to study for the IELTS. Just look at the question paper pattern and go. I will say though, be
Right.
careful about how long those exams are valid for. So the GRE score remains valid for 5 years. The
Mm-hmm.
IELTS and TOEFL scores remain valid for 2 years. That's why I had to give the IELTS later, or my score wouldn't have been valid for
Right.
2020, 2021.
Right.
Um, After the entrance exams were done was pretty much immediately when I started working on my resume and SOP with my teachers. So
Right.
if you're applying for September of a particular year, the deadline
Mm-hmm.
for applications is generally end of January of that year
Okay.
itself. So for example, if you had been applying for September 2020, like I was, the deadlines were
Mm-hmm.
January and some in February 2020.
Okay.
You
Okay.
have to be done that early. Then your applications are assessed and your letters will generally start coming in by March, latest April. Uh, they tend to have this thing called a conditional and unconditional offer. An unconditional
Okay.
offer means you've been admitted, no conditions, you choose whether to accept or reject. A conditional offer is when they're saying ki, we are willing to offer you a place, there's just a few more conditions we'd like you to meet, which is what you'll get if
Okay.
you happen to apply before the final exam, which is what I did.
Okay.
So the condition
Right.
in my case obviously becomes you need to provide your final mark sheet and your pass certificate. It was just that.
Right. Right.
So that way, so essentially you apply by the time the deadlines come in, you get your acceptance letters, you choose which university you want to go to, at the same time keeping an eye on the scholarship deadlines, because scholarship deadlines, so the deadline generally for getting all of your documents and accepting your place is generally the first or second week of July, maybe even June, differs from university to university.
Okay.
And the deadline for scholarships is generally in May. So if
Right.
you have, like I said, scholarships can differ. Either you'll be automatically considered, there are some you need to apply for. If there are scholarships you need to apply for, keep an eye on the deadline. You may have to submit stuff early in April.
Right.
Point by June, you'll have, accepted your letter. Then you'll start, then the entire rest of the process starts. The universities are very helpful. They'll send you all the links you need. So, accommodation, etc., arrival, visa, all of that. And once that is done, if this is obviously not taking corona into consideration, but if you were
Right.
traveling if your semester was starting on September 1st as usual, you would be traveling in August to attend like an introductory program, etc., and then
Right.
starting
Right.
in September. So that would be a
Okay.
general timeline.
Okay. So thank you so much for all of
Thank you.
that. But before we like wrap up the entire interview, there's a few interesting viewer questions that we have received,
Yeah,
and
sure.
I want. So Rohan Tripathi asks if anyone is planning a master's in nature conservation in the US, will a pre-master's from RUIA be helpful? Because RUIA has specialization in animal physiology and marine science. Can you weigh in on that, please?
So it's like I said earlier, some universities actually do need you to do a pre-masters. Some don't. My
Mm-hmm.
brother, like I said, had to do a pre-masters program because the amount of credits he got from his course wasn't enough for the master's course that he'd applied for. I didn't run
Right.
into any such issue. The masters in forest and nature conservation looked at my thing and judged that yeah, you've got the required amount of credits in the required field. So I'll say if you're planning for a master's in nature conservation in the US, because the US specifically has, I'm guessing he's asked because the US has the 12+4 rule.
Right.
The thing is, you're going to have to email the university and ask them specifically what their conditions are, because I believe a
Mm-hmm.
pre-master's does not count as a year of education. A
Right.
pre-master's counts towards the credits of your exam,
Okay.
of your program, total program. So like it'll help increase. If you had 120 credits, it might go to like 130 or 140. But I don't know. I'm not sure if a pre-masters counts as a year of education. I don't think it does. I think it just counts towards your credits. So you may, again, like I said, each university has individual policies. It would help you to
Right.
email the university that you're targeting and ask them, if this is my situation, my education is 12+3, but I'm really interested. So would I have to do an extra year of masters, or would doing a pre-masters work out for me? It would
Right.
probably always help to ask.
All right. That's a pretty clear answer. Okay. Shubham Soni asks, what exactly do they look for in an SOP? And what was your SOP like? Now, I know you like briefly touched upon how it's like a monument to your passion for that subject. But like, would you mind going to some of the finer details of what you put in your SOP?
So again, it becomes kind. I told you, it becomes kind of like a personal essay. So my SOP in particular
Right.
was talking about how my parents have been taking me to national parks, etc., since I was a kid, literally since I was 6 or 7 years old. And then because it's just me, my mom, and dad, and every single
Right.
member of a family was very comfortable in the forest. And once my parents realized that I liked it, there was no reason for us to not spend literally every single vacation we had in a different national park. So we started
Right.
with Ranthambore, Bandhavgarh, Corbett, and it just pretty much
Right. Right.
spiraled
Right.
from there.
Right.
So, like I said, I came to the decision that I wanted to do wildlife very early on because I've always been
Mm-hmm.
invested in the sciences, and I liked wildlife. I love traveling, and I love being near the jungle. I
Right.
really can't deal with city life that well. So I
I
talked
see.
about that in my SOP. You can say all of that in your SOP in clear, precise
Mm-hmm.
language. The reason why you fell in love with this field, why I fell in love with the field, why I fell in love with birds in particular,
Right.
what drew me to the field, how my
Mm-hmm.
parents were the driving factor for bringing me into this, how I did my own research, how I did courses online from Cornell, etc., just to learn more, and how I
Right.
decided that I want to work for awareness, I want to help, I want to be a part of the conservation force and not just look at it from the sidelines, which is why I'm applying for this field of course at this university, because now that I'm not a kid anymore, I'd like to go from
Right.
being just a passive bird watcher to someone who's actively working for their conservation. So
Right.
all of this you can put into your SOP. Make it as passionate as you can, honestly, because the more this personality and the more passion they see in that SOP, the more inclined they'll be to accept it.
All right. All right. That's a pretty eloquent answer, honestly. And so the next question comes from Avni, who asks how to look for different courses. Even one course can have a lot of others connected to it. So how can you find like the one suited to your interest?
So I got lucky. Like I said, I was pretty fixated on what I needed to do, but I actually
Mm-hmm.
had to go a little ulta. I was
Right.
hyper fixated on ornithology, specifically on birds. But I realized that
Mm-hmm.
not many colleges actually offer that as a master's. It's more of a thesis and a PhD sort of subject. So I actually had to backpedal a step and go, okay, if
Right.
not ornithology, can I broaden to wildlife and wildlife conservation and forest and nature conservation? And automatically, I found
Right.
a lot of courses. As for
Mm-hmm.
how I found the courses, Google is your best friend. Literally, just Google master. I'm not joking. Just Google masters in this course. Even if you're not like 100% sure on what field you want, if you know what you need to know what your interests are personal. Like if you're like, say if you're more on the marine biology side, say okay, I
Right.
maybe marine biology, but do I want to be in the algal and plant side? Do I want to be on the animal side? Which side do I want to be
Mm-hmm.
on? So you can just Google all of it. Just Google like masters in marine courses for masters. Look at the different courses that universities offer. Look at the sites that throw up rankings, etc. And read. There's a lot of information on the university sites online. So just read through their program descriptions. And like I said, if you really need more answers, just email the faculty advisors. Like, can you send me a summary of the program? I'm interested. They'll be more than happy to help you, even if you don't end up applying to that university. Those people will be more than happy to help you. So just
Perfect.
I'd say do as much research as you can online.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. So the next question comes from Sarvesh, and it is about how we are supposed to plan the loans and scholarships. So I think we touched on this briefly. Do you have anything more to add to that?
Not really, because again, like I said, the problem is like I can't elaborate really on the scholarship sector, because I told you each university will offer different scholarships to you, and the procedure
Right.
can differ from university to university. Some are offered, some you apply to, deadlines differ, requirements differ, etc., etc.
Right.
So the scholarships is something that you, once you finalize universities, you need to be pretty much stalking their website for, and checking deadlines, checking if there's any new offers, checking what you need to do, etc. In terms of
Right.
student loans, the student loans aren't really something that the university will organize. That's on your side in the
I
finances if
see.
you are going to be taking a loan. So that's honestly something that you'll probably need to talk out with your bank and etc. I don't think I'll be able
I
to help
see.
you
I
much
see.
on that sector. But
I
I
see.
would say, like, don't start planning your loan until you have your acceptance letter and everything, obviously, and also potentially if you are applying for scholarships after that, so you'll know
Mhm.
the amount and what you need to take. A lot of people offer
Okay.
discounted interest rates or education loans, so like you won't really run into that much of an issue.
Understood. Understood. So the next question comes from Parab, who asks, and this is a very interesting question actually. How exactly do you think the COVID situation has, affected students who have wanted to apply internationally? Like, what
So
effects have you seen?
obviously
Yeah.
I applied for the September 2020 intake, but
Right.
the thing is, like, do you remember I talked about conditional and unconditional offers? So mine was obviously a conditional offer pending my last mark sheet and pass certificate, which, if everything had gone normally, our last exam was in March of 2020, would have gotten our final mark sheet by say April, May, maybe, would have submitted that, and we would have been fine. Obviously did not happen, and I didn't get my
Hmm.
mark sheet in by the deadline, which was June 1st. And they
Right.
made it very clear that we can't literally cannot accept you as a student if you don't have your final mark sheet. So then I had to
Right.
defer my offer. So obviously September 2020, pretty much nobody was able to go because no one got their final results.
Right.
Currently, as of right now, I got lucky. Most people who are applying for
Hmm.
September 2020 have had to defer to 2021 September, because obviously there's a year gap, you know,
Right.
next year. Or
Right.
some people have started their course online if they were able to get admission despite the mark sheet problem. Some people started
Right.
online, some people chose to defer anyway. But I got lucky. My program in my university happens to have two starts. Essentially, there are two batches. Batch one starts in September, batch two starts in February. And I
Hmm.
got lucky enough that so I can go now because the travel conditions have obviously opened up a bit, etc.
Right.
I'd say going forward from here, I'm not going to talk about the United States because it's a bit chaotic. The EU,
Right.
at least, is currently in a very strict lockdown, and they're doing a bit better, and they're going ahead with vaccinations.
Right.
All goes well and they maintain their conditions the way they have, I'd say within six,
Hmm.
7 months, you should see the EU pretty much normal.
I see.
Again,
That's
I
it.
will say EU and not United Kingdom because that new strain is a bit iffy, but the United Kingdom also seems to be dealing with it well. So I'd say within six,
Hmm.
7 months, the European Union should have recovered. New Zealand and Australia are doing very well. People must already
Right.
know. But obviously, they've also restricted their travel right now. The US is going to be a bit tricky. I am not sure how good the situation is going to be there right now. All of my friends who are there right now for undergrad and for everything have been doing their classes online this whole time. And
Right.
they're saying that they're not sure when this is going to let up because the situation is, quite frankly, really bad
Yeah.
right now.
It's chaotic. Right. Right. So next question comes once more from Rohan Tripathi, and he asks us, what is the value of a European Union degree in India? Like, how
So
much value does it hold?
plenty. Like this isn't like a necessarily like a medical. Again, yeah, I will say it depends on the degree you're getting. I
Right.
remember I'm not very well versed in the medical field, but I do remember hearing that certain medical degrees that you get abroad are not valid in India, and you will
Hmm.
have to retake some courses. But as far
Okay.
as I know, a master's, a pure research based, pure science master's, that it makes no difference because it's a research
I see.
master's. You've literally done your own thesis, you've done your internship, you have a
That's
research
true.
paper to
That's
your
true.
name. So that's not going to impact. You come here and you say, I have a master's in research, say master's in let's go marine biology, masters in marine biology from XYZ university. They're not just going to look at your resume and stuff again. They're not going to say, "Arey, the degree is not from India, it's not valid." That really doesn't happen in the
Hmm.
research sector. If it's more of an applied sector, generally I'd say be careful if it's like in the medical sector, leaning towards the medical sector, like pharma or something like that. Because from what I can tell, there seems to be a lot of back and forth over which degree is valid and which degree is not valid. But
Right.
as far as I know, there's no problem with research degrees from outside, because I have moms, friends, etc., who have research degrees outside, have been
And have worked
working
here.
in India, have no problem.
Okay, okay. So I think this is the last question we have, and
Yeah.
this is from Samiksha. She asks, is it necessary to select a master's course, having a direct correlation? Like the example she offers here is a BSc Maths degree and a Master's in Environmental Science. Now, I think this is a little drastic, but let's amend that a little. How about something like, a degree in Maths and to a degree in Physics or something like that?
No, the thing
Like,
is,
is
this
that
could also
possible?
work. This could
It
also
could?
work. Yeah, here's the thing. Remember when I talked about how they look more at course credits than they look at
Okay,
this. So in this case, if you're looking for a master's in environmental sciences, then the
right.
requirement for that course is going to, it'll state clearly on their page, course requirement, some number of credits in the biological
Hmm.
sector. So like
Okay,
if you had course credits in botany, in zoology, microbiology, biotech, all of these fields,
right.
any of these fields, those credits would all count. Maths would probably
Okay.
only count to a certain extent, because a master's in environmental sciences will still need statistics. So if you have a statistics paper,
Hmm.
all of the statistics credits would probably still count. But the thing is, if your BSc is maths and you're applying for an
Right,
environmental science masters, you are going into run into the problem that my brother ran into, which is insufficient credits.
right,
So what you will probably end up doing is, they will either tell you to, they will look at the number of credits you need. Like if it's just, off by a certain number, they'll ask you to do what my brother did, which is a pre-masters. They'll say, please do a
right,
pre-masters course for the required number
right,
of credits and apply again, and you'll actually
right.
get in as well. But again, this is something
Right.
that you'll have to communicate with the university for. It's not necessary that it'll work out the way I'm saying. If the number of credits you have is too low, then they might say, no, it won't work out here. You would have needed like a proper year or so of a biological degree for it to work.
Hmm.
But
I see.
you can always pre-masters. I saw a lot of people talking about pre-masters. Pre-masters will help you get credits for stuff like this. If your BSc is in something else and you're applying for a master's in something else, pre-masters is going to be a massive help in cases like this.
I see. I
Again, do
see.
everything in communication with your university. Don't do the thing where you do something and then ask, because you might find out you did something unnecessarily as well.
Right. Right. All right. That makes
But yeah,
perfect sense.
basically you don't have to select a master's course related to your bachelor's course, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously the number of credits matters a lot. So it'll be more difficult for you for sure. It'll be more difficult if you're
Understood.
coming from maths into environmental sciences, but it's doable. It's doable for sure.
Got it. Got it. That's a pretty hopeful note to strike, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like
it'll be
it
difficult.
doesn't
i'm not
sound.
i'm not
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, it'll be difficult, and some
Difficult.
universities might not accept it, but some will be willing to help you out. And if you're really determined to do it, then they'll be able to recommend courses and things that you can do in order to help yourself out and apply.
Right. Right. So I think that's pretty much it for
All
from
right.
my end. And I'd like to thank you so much for coming and being a guest this session. And there's just one note actually like to strike before we pull the curtains down, and that is we are conducting an interview with another one of our graduates, Ojas Chaudhary, on the 16th Jan at 4 p.m. same time, and it's going to be about working abroad as opposed to like studying. And
Yeah,
I would
I'm
really
going to be
encourage.
there.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty like it's pretty all important, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
actually having that kind of life experience in that country abroad is really huge, and I think that's pretty
So
valuable.
I obviously haven't traveled yet. I will be traveling on the
Right.
28th of January to the Netherlands, and that's when obviously my course starts officially on the 15th of February. So obviously I
Mm-hmm.
haven't experienced any of foreign life for myself. I was
Right.
obviously able to, I hopefully help everyone out in terms of queries on applications, etc., about the MS degree. But if you guys
Mm-hmm.
need information about actually living there, even more input on cultural differences and the do's and don'ts, and obviously job opportunities and job
Right.
experience, uh, Ojas's interview is going to be much, much more helpful in that case.
All right then. So that's it. Thank you so much for being here and
Thank you. This
attending.
was
Thank you
fun.
so much. It
I hope
wasn't
I
it?
was able to help
I,
some people. Good luck to
yep.
everyone. And seriously,
All right.
don't stress about it. I promise you, don't stress about the research experience and internship experience. It'll work out. Just make sure that you can get them as well rounded a resume as you can. And don't stress about it.
Right. What a helpful note to end the entire interview. Thank you so much. And thank you to our
Thank you.
viewers for tuning in.